I stood frozen in the center of a flattened field, dust still rising from the crater where my grandfather's church once stood, reduced to rubble by 5 unauthorized HOA bulldozers that rolled in like tanks at dawn. The steeple had collapsed sideways, crushing the stained glass window my great-uncle had installed by hand. An old Bible lay in the mud, pages fluttering in the wind like feathers from a wounded angel. Karen stood across from me in designer sunglasses and a sun hat, flanked by clipboard-toting henchmen, arms crossed like she was proud of her work. She called it removing an eyesore. I called it sacrilege. She had no idea that before the week was out, I'd return the favor, with 5 bulldozers of my own. The only difference? I was going to build something in their place that could never be torn down. Tell me this, what happens when you demolish the wrong man's church? I hadn't set foot in my grandfather's town for nearly 10 years, not since the funeral. But when I pulled onto the gravel road leading up to the old chapel, a narrow lane lined with oaks that bowed like sentinels, I felt the same weight press against my ribs that I'd carried since childhood. It wasn't grief, it was memory. The church stood just ahead, exactly as I remembered it, stubborn against time, whitewashed clapboard siding. A steeple that tilted slightly to the left from decades of wind. A simple iron bell that could still wake the whole town on Sundays. And there, rising like a scar above the tree line, was the wooden cross my grandfather had carved himself with hands, gnarled by time but unwavering in faith. It was more than just a building. It was our bloodline. Every baptism, every wedding, every funeral in our family had passed through that arched oak doorway. So when I saw the orange notice nailed to the front double doors, structure deemed unsafe by HOA Order 94C, my chest went hollow. At first, I thought it was a prank. Some bureaucratic mix-up, a notice posted in error by a zealous clerk. But the red tape stretched around the entrance, the yellow flags marking the ground like targets, and the pending demolition placard hammered beside the cornerstone told me it wasn't. I stormed into the town clerk's office with photos of the permit, ready to tear into whoever filed it. But they pointed me straight to the new regime, the Meadowrise Homeowners Association. And at the top of their chain of command stood a woman named Karen Tinsley. She had moved in 5 years ago, rose to power in 2, and had spent every day since trying to turn a historic rural community into some glossy suburban development from a real estate brochure. She called herself a steward of forward momentum. The rest of the town called her the HOA Karen. And apparently, she declared my grandfather's church a non-conforming structure that violated community standards for architectural cohesion and public aesthetics. Translation? It didn't match the fake stone mailboxes and vinyl-sided nightmares she'd squeezed into what used to be farmland. I set a meeting. She didn't show. I filed an exemption under the Historic Religious Use Clause, an airtight federal protection. 2 days later, it was denied without explanation. The town was changing fast. What used to be wheat fields and modest bungalows had sprouted into rows of gray and beige houses stacked like dominoes, gated lanes, synthetic turf, no clotheslines, no gardens, no life. The HOA bylaws read like war crimes against authenticity. And the church, built by my great-great-grandfather with reclaimed barn timber and sweat, was now labeled blight. I wasn't going to let it fall. I contacted a preservation lawyer named Elliot who specialized in religious zoning disputes. I dug through records, unearthing land grants and exemptions older than the town's post office. I gathered affidavits from locals, people who were married there, buried there, baptized in the stone basin beneath the pulpit. I even got a pastor from the state council to write a statement. "It is a religious structure. It is sacred ground," he said. "It is not subject to an HOA's aesthetic whims." We submitted everything. We appealed. And we waited. Karen doubled down. She sent citations for weeds in the gravel parking lot. She fined me $800 for structural decay because of a cracked step. She scheduled a safety inspection during a Sunday service and tried to shut it down. She told neighbors the church was attracting unapproved gatherings. Then she blocked access to the online hearing. Elliot called it what it was, targeted demolition. He tried to file an emergency injunction but warned me they'd buried it under layers of misdirection. "They know how to delay just long enough to act," he said. If they think you're getting close to stopping them, they'll strike before the paperwork catches up. So I stayed in the chapel every night that week, sleeping in the old choir loft with a thermos of black coffee and a crowbar by the door. I wasn't afraid of what might come. I was afraid of not being there when it did. But they didn't come at night. They came at dawn. I woke up to the sound of tires crunching gravel and the slow rumble of diesel engines. When I looked through the slats of the stained glass window, I saw them. 5 yellow bulldozers, flanked by SUVs with tinted windows and HOA official magnets slapped on the sides. Karen wasn't even in the lead vehicle. She rolled up 5 minutes later, stepping out of her black Lexus in heels and a wide-brimmed sun hat like she was attending a groundbreaking ceremony. "Stop the equipment!" I shouted, running out the front doors. "You're not authorized. There's a legal appeal pending." One of the foremen, wearing a hard hat and the expression of someone who'd been given a bonus for silence, handed me a printout of a revised demolition order. It was stamped and notarized, dated yesterday, signed by the HOA's internal legal rep, not the court. "That's not a judge," I snapped. "That's a private attorney." He shrugged. "They said it was cleared." Then the first bulldozer lunged forward. The noise was deafening. Wood splintered like bones. Glass exploded outward in a burst of color. The bell tower snapped in two like a toy, crashing to the ground with a low, mournful clang that felt more like a scream. I stood on the gravel lot screaming, waving the court papers, yelling at anyone who'd listen. They didn't. They didn't care. The steeple fell next. The roof caved in under its own weight, sending decades of dust and hymnals into the air like ash. In less than an hour, the church was a pile of rubble. Karen stood at the edge of the field taking photos, smiling. And then she posted it. It was on Facebook, Instagram, and even the Meadow Rise community portal. A photo of her posing with a bulldozer in the background, hard hat tilted jauntily on her head. The caption read, "Eyesore eliminated. Community progress begins." Like it was a win. Like it was something to be proud of. I didn't even recognize the woman who had the gall to post that. But what I did recognize, buried beneath the rubble, half charred and caked in dust, was my grandfather's Bible. The same one he kept on the pulpit. The same one he used to read from every Sunday without fail. I pulled it from the debris, the leather warped by heat, pages crumbling at the edges but still intact. Inside the front cover, in his blocky handwriting, was the inscription he always said to me: "Protect what matters, even if you have to rebuild it with your bare hands." I stood there as the bulldozers rolled away, leaving tire tracks where the altar used to be. Karen never looked back. The sky was clear. The land was scorched. And all I had left was a book full of dust, a memory full of rage, and a vow that this wasn't over, not even close. I spent the next 3 nights sleeping in my truck, parked on the scorched patch of land where the church used to stand. Not because I couldn't go home, but because I refused to. That church was my grandfather's life work, his sweat, his prayers, his promise to the town. And now it was nothing but a memory buried under bulldozer tread. The morning after the demolition, I walked the perimeter of the rubble, GPS in hand, cross-referencing property lines from the HOA's website with the old blueprints I'd pulled out of the family filing cabinet. Something didn't sit right. According to the plat map issued by the HOA 6 months ago, the church lot had been absorbed into shared community expansion zones through a reclassification clause, something that should have triggered a mandatory vote from residents and a full zoning review. I found neither in the county's public record, which meant something was buried, something they didn't want me to see. I drove to the county recorder's office with a stack of papers and fire behind my eyes. The clerk on duty, a woman in her late 20s with more tattoos than patience, raised an eyebrow when I dumped the stack on the desk. "I need zoning records, trust ownership documents, and variance reclassification filings for parcel 14B and 15C. And I need them printed, not emailed," I said. She shrugged, typed, and raised another eyebrow. "According to this, parcel 14B, the church lot, was transferred out of religious designation 18 months ago. To who?" I asked. "The HOA? Technically to a holding company called Greenfield Infrastructure LLC. But they listed HOA interests in the notes." "Who authorized the transfer?" "A clerk named Raymond Tolliver. Stamps right here." She slid the file across. And there it was, his signature in blue ink. But it didn't match the one on his official filings. Not even close. I took a photo. She looked at me sideways. Something wrong? Yeah, I said. This transfer is forged. Back at my grandfather's house, I went digging through everything, filing cabinets, bank boxes, even the crawl space beneath the porch. That's when I found it. The original land deed, signed and notarized, declaring the church and its parcel as permanent religious trust property, not subject to commercial reallocation or eminent domain, without state-level override. The language was airtight, ironclad. And nowhere in the county's update did it mention that trust, which meant Karen hadn't just bulldozed a church, she'd bulldozed protected land under federal exemption. I called Elliot, my lawyer. He didn't even let me finish. You're telling me she demolished a trust-designated church without clearing it through the Secretary of State's office? That's exactly what I'm telling you. There was a long pause. That's not just a violation, that's criminal. That clerk's in trouble. And Karen? She's going to wish she just left it alone. But she hadn't. In fact, she was only getting started. That afternoon, I came home to find a bright orange notice duct taped to the front door of my grandfather's farmhouse. Unregistered occupancy. Non-compliant storage structure. Trash violation. 1,250 fine. 3 citations stacked in one day. I looked down the street and saw the HOA compliance truck parked crooked on the corner. A man with a camera around his neck was snapping pictures of the property like he was cataloging a crime scene. I walked over and asked him what he thought he was doing. He handed me a printed HOA memo signed by Karen herself. Due to recent security and sanitation concerns, it read, "Adjacent lots tied to the condemned structure are being reviewed for integration into the planned community health and wellness initiative." I tore it in half and dropped it at his feet. He took another photo. 2 days later, they started digging. Bulldozers. Again. Not to clean up the rubble, but to lay the foundation for what the HOA was now calling the Meadow Rise Wellness Pavilion, a bland euphemism for a yoga studio, juice bar, and corporate leasing center. There were signs already posted on the fencing. Slick renderings of granite walkways, pastel-colored benches, and a meditation garden sitting exactly where my grandfather's pulpit once stood. They even included a line in the brochure that made my stomach turn. Coming soon, peace, health, and progress where the past once stood. They weren't just trying to erase the church. They were trying to erase the idea of it, the memory, the permanence. I stood at the fence, looking at the cartoon version of what was coming, and something in me finally broke. Not emotionally. Strategically. I stopped playing defense that day. I stopped making calls and started printing affidavits. I stopped filing appeals and started compiling evidence. I began mapping out everything. Who signed what, when it was filed, how it was posted. I started a timeline, nailed to the wall of my grandfather's kitchen with red string and index cards. I tracked when the reclassification had been filed, who'd signed it, and when the church had mysteriously disappeared from the county's protected structure list. I matched that timeline to campaign donations. Karen had given $5,000 to the county planning commissioner's re-election fund the same month Tolliver filed the forged transfer. I found an invoice from Greenfield Infrastructure LLC, a shell company run out of a P.O. box, where the payment address just happened to match the accounting firm used by Karen's husband. I filed a formal ethics complaint against Raymond Tolliver with the county auditor's office. Within 72 hours, he was placed on leave pending investigation. I sent copies of the original deed, the forged signature, and the reclassification to the State Historical Society. They flagged it as a potential zoning fraud and opened a case of their own. I sent documentation to a civil liberties watchdog group. I sent photos of the demolition to a local paper. I even sent Karen a certified letter, signature required, informing her that any further construction on the property would constitute illegal encroachment under active dispute. I wasn't asking her to stop. I was daring her to continue. And she did. The next week, they sent an HOA-appointed contractor to assess the side garage of my grandfather's farmhouse. He called it a safety risk and ordered it sealed. He came back the next day with a crew to nail shut the doors. I called the sheriff. The sheriff told me it was a civil matter. I called the insurance company to file a claim for the demolition damage. They told me that the policy had been administratively canceled due to reclassification of the property from religious use to unzoned public utility, a line that only Karen's office could have filed. I couldn't prove she hacked the policy directly, but I could prove motive. And the thing about motive is, once you've got it on paper, the rest starts to fall like dominoes. I met with Elliot on a Wednesday. I remember it because it was the first time I saw him actually smile. They filed the pavilion permit under municipal fast track for a public health center, he said, tapping the paperwork, which would be legal if it weren't built on private trust land. He looked up at me. They just invalidated their own development. I nodded. Then let's bury them with it. We filed a complaint under the Religious Land Use and Institutionalized Persons Act, a federal protection that makes it a crime to interfere with religious land without an extraordinary legal threshold. We didn't just cite the demolition. We cited every move since. The forged reclassification, the permit signed under false designation, the construction of a public use building without a zoning override. Elliot said it plainly, this isn't just civil fraud anymore, this is constitutional. Karen got the notice 5 days later. I wasn't there when she opened it, but I imagine her smile cracked, the same way the bell tower had. She didn't speak to the press. She didn't post her usual HOA updates for a full week. But she did send out a new memo to the community. Due to legal entanglements and the aggressive tactics of certain parties, construction on the wellness center is temporarily paused. We thank the community for their patience during this time of transition. Transition. That was her word for it. But I had a different one. War. And it had only just begun. It started with an email. Just a subject line. They're not done yet. No signature, no body text, just a zip file attachment labeled invoice, logs, Q4. At first, I thought it was a scare tactic, maybe another attempt by Karen's cronies to get me to back off. But when I opened it, I realized it wasn't a threat. It was a map, one leading straight into the beating heart of a rot that went far deeper than aesthetic violations or forged zoning paperwork. It was hundreds of internal HOA documents, financial statements, and flagged payment entries, contractor payouts with no corresponding work orders, consulting fees for firms that didn't seem to exist. Thousands of dollars funneled every month to shell companies with names like Urban Harmony Advisors and Civic Solutions Group, all traced back to a single shared address. A 3-desk office suite in a strip mall 3 towns over. That address belonged to a woman named Maureen Ellis, listed as executive facilitator on multiple consulting invoices. A quick public records search told me she'd been Karen Tinsley's college roommate. I'd just found her money trail. The next day, the emailer revealed himself. His name was Jonah, early 20s, former junior accountant for Meadowrise HOA's financial team. Fired 6 months ago under the excuse of disrupting workflow efficiency, which, according to him, meant asking too many questions. He looked like a kid who still ironed his button-ups for interviews, but had already seen too much of the dark underbelly of suburban power. I didn't know what she was at first, he told me, sitting across from me at the diner just outside town. I thought it was just bloated vendor contracts, but then I started noticing patterns. Same invoice amount every month, different companies, same bank account routing. He slid a flash drive across the table. That's everything I pulled before they locked me out. You'll find 10 companies, all fake, all tied to Karen and 3 other board members. They call it operational optimization. I call it theft. I bought his coffee, I gave him Elliot's card. And I told him that, from that moment forward, he wasn't alone. Because he wasn't. By then, word of the church demolition had spread further than I expected. Not just within Meadowrise, but to the surrounding counties. People who'd known the chapel. People who'd been baptized there, married there, who'd driven by it every week for years and felt something when they saw its steeple breaking the horizon. One of them was Pastor Malcolm Greer from just over the ridge in Elmdale. He'd lost his own sanctuary 3 years earlier when the Ridgeview HOA declared his rural chapel an unauthorized permanent structure built too close to a waterway. They cited him, fined him, and filed permits to convert the site into a community gardening center. That gardening center, he said, now sells fresh pressed kale juice for $12 a bottle. He stood in the wreckage of my grandfather's church with a hand on my shoulder and said, "I wasn't strong enough to fight them alone, but if you'll have me, I'm ready to stand with you now." And the allies kept coming. Next was Taylor Brightman, former assistant city planner for Meadow County. She showed up to one of my coalition meetings in a beat-up Toyota and boots caked in construction site dust. "Karen had me redline the environmental report for the pavilion," she said, handing over a folder. "I quit the day she told me to delete the groundwater data. That land shouldn't support concrete, much less traffic. It was zoned for low-impact foot use, but she fast-tracked a variance by pushing it through the Green Space Allocation Board." I blinked. "Is that legal?" Taylor smirked. "Only if everyone signs off. And 2 of the signatures on that board are dead. 1, literally." I offered her a chair at the table. She didn't take it. She leaned on the back instead, arms crossed, like she was guarding the room. Then came Saul, a general contractor who Karen hired during Phase 1 of the beautification initiative last year. "She paid me to tear down 3 original porches," he said they were unsafe. They weren't. I tried to push back, and she withheld payment for 6 months. Ended up costing me my business. "You want documentation?" "I've got job orders, texts, and a voicemail where she says, 'Don't make me ruin you, Saul. I can, and I will.'" He paused. "I'm done being afraid." And finally, maybe the most unexpected of all, was Gerald Abbott, a sitting member of the HOA board. He met me after dusk, behind the abandoned school bus lot on the edge of town, like we were in a spy movie. "I've been voting yes for 2 years, out of fear," he said, breath fogging in the cold. "But I didn't sign up for this. Not to bulldoze churches, not to defraud people, not to funnel money into wellness centers built on top of graveyards." He handed me his voting logs, his notes, his silent dissent. "Use them," he said. "Use all of it." We did. With Elliot at the helm, we filed a formal federal lawsuit under RLUIPA, the Religious Land Use and Institutionalized Persons Act. The suit alleged not only the unlawful destruction of a protected religious site, but a pattern of targeted obstruction, harassment, and systemic abuse designed to eliminate spiritual presence from HOA-controlled land. We submitted over 300 pages of documentation, photos, testimony, and whistleblower reports. We attached Jonah's accounting files, Taylor's zoning records, Pastor Greer's loss history, Saul's payment disputes, and Gerald's voting evidence. We named names. We drew lines. We left no gaps. And then we waited. The judge scheduled a hearing within 10 days. Not the local judge. He recused himself. Karen's husband golfed with him. This was handled at the federal circuit level, a higher court. One Karen couldn't charm with muffins and municipal buzzwords. The courtroom was packed the day we presented. Local media showed up, curious about the bulldozed chapel scandal. Community members lined the benches. Some wore T-shirts with the church's old bell tower printed on them. Elliot spoke first. Calm, methodical, devastating. "This is not just a matter of overreach," he told the judge. "This is a community's heritage, stolen under the guise of beautification. A place of worship erased for profit, and now they want to pave over it with branding language and juice bars." Karen didn't speak. Her lawyer did. He was slick, confident, and already sweating by minute 20. When the judge asked about the forged land reclassification, the attorney fumbled his papers. When asked why no religious exemption was honored, he muttered something about aesthetic compliance guidelines. The judge narrowed his eyes. "Are you telling this court that aesthetics outweigh religious freedom in the eyes of your board?" "Not exactly," the attorney said. "Then be very careful what you say next." By the end of the session, the air felt 10 degrees colder. 1 week later, the injunction was granted. All further construction on the pavilion was immediately and indefinitely halted. The land was declared in legal dispute pending full review of the trust designation and historical significance. Karen's office was notified. Her permit was frozen. Her contractors were ordered off-site. She was legally barred from taking any further action on the property until the case was resolved in full. I received the news by certified letter. I read it 5 times before I let myself exhale. Karen didn't post anything that day. No community bulletin, no HOA newsletter, no thinly veiled threats. In fact, she vanished. No one saw her for days. Her house sat dark. Her usual crew stopped showing up at the office. It was like someone had pulled the plug on her little empire, and the power surge fried every circuit. Me? I sat on the steps of the farmhouse with a cup of coffee and the charred remains of my grandfather's Bible in my lap. I wasn't smiling out of joy. I was smiling because, for the first time since she flattened the chapel, I saw the cracks forming in her foundation. The lies were leaking. The armor was dented. And the war she thought she won with a bulldozer had just begun to turn. Because I hadn't just found the ashes of my grandfather's church. I'd found the people willing to stand in those ashes with me and fight. The thing about cornered animals is that they don't go quietly, they go rabid. And Karen, freshly served with a federal injunction and a stack of subpoenas, wasn't going to vanish into her vinyl palace without clawing through every rulebook and neighbor she could sink her teeth into. She started with Spin. The HOA's community portal exploded overnight with a slick new redevelopment FAQ drafted by her PR consultant, some guy named Clark whose headshot looked like he practiced smiling in a mirror full-time. It called the lawsuit an extremist disruption. It labeled the demolished church an unregistered ruin. It accused my coalition of attempting to halt community advancement through manufactured outrage. Manufactured. That was the word she used. As if the rubble under my boots, the photos of the chapel collapsing in real time, the charred Bible in my kitchen, all of that had been set dressed for drama. And just to really drive the stake in deeper, the very next morning, she submitted new paperwork to fast-track the construction of a temporary HOA emergency command center right next to the remains of the church. She claimed the pending litigation made the original HQ vulnerable, and that the HOA needed a secure site for community protection protocols. I filed for eminent domain reversal within the hour. Backed by 3 months of documentation, affidavits from 72 residents, drone footage of the illegal demolition, the original religious trust deed, and now the full support of the state's Historical Preservation Office, who issued an emergency protection designation for the lot. The second they saw how close Karen's new foundation trench came to digging up marked graves from the 1880s. I also had letters from civil rights attorneys, zoning board members, and even a preservation officer from the Department of the Interior who flatly stated that the demolition had occurred without the proper historical impact review. Elliot filed the reversal paperwork, and I watched him slide the final form into the envelope with all the reverence of a general arming a missile. Karen's response wasn't legal. It was monstrous. Within 48 hours, 3 elderly homeowners received violation notices for unregistered exterior modifications on their front steps. Wooden planters, to be specific. 2 were fined. 1 was served an eviction notice for non-compliance with repeated structural requests. That man was 84 years old, partially blind, and had lived in that home since 1967. His daughter wheeled him to my doorstep the next day, holding the violation letter and shaking hands. "It's because he signed the affidavit," she said. "It's punishment." And it was. Retaliation. Pure and simple. Karen was using the HOA code like a loaded weapon, firing it at anyone who dared stand beside me. But she made a mistake. She didn't just attack him. She attacked a veteran. A grandfather. A man beloved in that neighborhood. And she did it with paperwork. Local news picked it up within a day. The headline was simple, brutal, and inescapable. "Oh, President evicts elderly man in wake of church lawsuit." Underneath was a photo of him sitting in his wheelchair, clutching an American flag and a copy of the Bible from the chapel. By sunset, the story had been picked up by a regional affiliate. By midnight, it was trending on Twitter. And by morning, our coalition's email inbox had over 900 messages. Most were supportive. Some were death threats. A few came from other states, describing similar HOA horror stories. But a handful came from very important people: state representatives, oversight watchdogs, investigative journalists. One email simply said, "Keep digging. There's more." That week, the HOA held a mandatory community meeting. Karen couldn't ignore the backlash anymore, and I knew what kind of performance she was planning. It wasn't damage control, it was theater. She booked the town hall, she stacked the room with loyalists, she brought in experts who looked suspiciously like actors from a real estate brochure. But what she didn't account for was how loud our side had gotten. The pews, yes, literal wooden pews salvaged from the demolished chapel, were packed with residents who hadn't stepped foot in a town hall in years. People who were tired, furious, and ready. Elliot sat beside me with a folder thick enough to be weaponized. Pastor Greer stood behind us, silent but burning. Jonah had a hard drive in his pocket. Taylor held the zoning maps like blueprints to a war machine. Karen took the stage in a white blazer, oversized pearls, and a fake humility that cracked before she said her first word. Good evening, friends. It's been a difficult time, full of unfortunate miscommunications and regrettable legal distractions. But I want to assure you, this community is still on track to be better, stronger, and more united. A few scattered claps, mostly from the front row, she continued. The so-called lawsuit against the HOA is not only without merit, it is a direct attack on the very progress we've made. Yes, the old church was removed. But let's be honest, it was a rotting shack. Unsafe, outdated, aesthetically damaging to the neighborhood's vision. A loud murmur erupted. I saw faces twist in shock. One man stood up and said, "My parents were married in that shack." Karen didn't flinch. And now your children will be able to enjoy modern wellness infrastructure and spiritual resources designed for today's needs, not yesterday's ghosts. She smiled, the kind of smile that belonged on a courtroom sketch. I stood up slowly. Is that what you're calling it now? I asked. Ghost removal? The room quieted. Because from where I stood, that shack you bulldozed was made of hand-cut timber laid by war survivors. It had a bell tower that rang for weddings, funerals, and soldiers coming home, and now it's a hole in the ground with plastic fencing around it. Karen crossed her arms. You had every opportunity to participate in the community redevelopment plan, but instead you chose to file frivolous lawsuits and wage a campaign of misinformation. This isn't activism, it's obstruction. And I will not allow Meadow Rise to be held hostage by nostalgia. She said that last word like it was a disease. Then let's talk about what you will allow, Elliot said, rising from his seat. He held the folder high. You will allow the federal court order that now restricts all construction on the pavilion site. You will allow the emergency preservation status granted by the state. You will allow an investigation into your contractor invoices, which now show over 300 in unaccounted funds. And you will allow a motion filed this morning with the County Development Board. Karen's lips parted. What motion? Elliot smiled. A demolition order. He let the words hang there. For the HOA headquarters, filed on behalf of the community. In response to code violations, illegal zoning practices, and unauthorized expansions made without public vote, a gasp rolled through the room. Karen tried to speak, but her voice caught. You can't do that. The HOA office is protected. It's municipal. Not anymore, I said, stepping forward. We proved it was registered under a fraudulent parcel classification. We traced the funding to illegal shell companies, and we submitted testimony from 4 board members and 2 city employees. The building is coming down, Karen, and it won't be in the dead of night like you did with the church. It'll be in broad daylight, with cameras, with permits, with cheers. The room erupted. Some people stood and clapped, others shouted. Karen just stood there, stunned, the color draining from her face. She looked like a queen watching her castle collapse brick by brick under the weight of truth. And I could see it the moment she realized this wasn't just a community pushback. It was a siege, and the gates had already been breached. That night, I walked to the edge of the construction site. The pavilion fencing was still up, but no workers remained. The foundation trench had started to fill with rainwater. It looked like a scar in the land. I stepped over the caution tape, walked to the center, and stood exactly where the pulpit used to be. Above me, the stars blinked quietly. Below me, the ground breathed. And somewhere, deep in the dirt, I knew the foundation of that old church still lived. Tomorrow, they'd bring machines, not to destroy, to return the favor, to balance the scales. This wasn't revenge. This was restoration, one demolition at a time. The morning the bulldozers arrived, the sky was clear, not a cloud in sight. The air was cool, crisp, still, like the earth itself was holding its breath. At 5:47 a.m., the street outside the Bulldorized HOA headquarters was silent. By 5:59, it buzzed with generators, exhaust, and anticipation. 5 bulldozers rolled in, side by side, their yellow-painted metal glinting like armored justice in the early sun. They weren't driven by county contractors or city workers. These were federal operators, quiet men in steel-toed boots, Navy windbreakers, and hard hats. Each one had a laminated court-order duct taped to their vest like a badge of divine authority. Behind them followed camera crews, news vans, a few drones hovering overhead, and residents. So many residents. They came with lawn chairs, thermoses. Some even brought popcorn. One old man brought a folding stool, an American flag, and a camera on a tripod. "Thought I'd get one final family photo," he joked, staring at the glass and concrete monstrosity Karen had called an operations center. It was shaped like a bunker and mirrored like a bank vault, flanked by 6 decorative fountains and a triple-height flagpole that flew the HOA emblem higher than the state flag. She'd built it to last. She never thought it would fall. At 6:00 a.m. sharp, the lead operator stepped forward. He didn't shout. He didn't even raise his voice. He just read from the court order. Under authority granted by the Federal Preservation Injunction and the Emergency Zoning Violation Enforcement Act, this structure is hereby condemned and scheduled for immediate deconstruction. His words echoed across the crowd, caught by every microphone and every live feed. There was no countdown, no ceremony, just a hand signal. Then the machines lunged forward with a growl that sent a tremor through the pavement. The first impact took out the fountain. The second shattered the mirrored facade like a sheet of ice cracking under a sledgehammer. Within minutes, the walls began to buckle. The rooftop signage groaned as it twisted, snapped, and crashed into the dust below. It was like watching a monument to tyranny collapse in real time. And then she came running. Karen burst from the side entrance like a hornet in human form, robe flapping, hair wild, no makeup, no entourage, just pure, unfiltered panic. "Stop! Stop this! This is my building!" she shrieked, stumbling over a pile of crushed pavers. "This is community property! You can't do this! I built this!" One of the agents calmly handed her a second copy of the order. She snatched it, read 2 lines, and let out a noise I've only ever heard from animals in traps. "This is harassment! This is illegal! This is mine!" Cameras zoomed in on her. Residents whispered, laughed, shook their heads. She turned to the crowd like a queen pleading with peasants. "Are you just going to stand there and let them destroy everything we worked for?" No one moved. Not one soul answered. Behind her, the glass dome collapsed inward like a dying lung, sending up a cloud of glittering dust that shimmered in the morning light. I didn't speak. I didn't need to. I just stood with Elliot, arms folded, watching her empire collapse the way she'd made ours collapse. She made her bed in destruction. Now she was choking on the dust. By 9:00 a.m., the structure was gone, bulldozed to its foundation. Not a wall, not a window, not a desk left standing. The land was bare, flattened, and finally, free. I stepped forward, walked to the center of the wreckage, and planted a small wooden stake in the soil. Attached was a laminated blueprint. Mount Bethany Baptist Church, revised 2023. Based on original 1,878 drawings. Below it, I had printed a simple line of text. "We begin again." Rebuilding wasn't easy. It never is. But it was sacred. I brought in craftsmen from across the region, heritage masons, timber framers, stained glass restorers, people who believed in restoration, People who knew how to turn rubble back into reverence. We used reclaimed barnwood for the walls, handmade brick from a family kiln 2 counties over. The bell, donated by a Presbyterian church that had been decommissioned in the 90s. Its chime was deeper than the old one, fuller, like it had waited decades to ring again. We laid the foundation exactly where the original stood, but this time we reinforced it with steel rebar, hurricane anchors, and fire-treated beams. Not because we feared nature, because we knew what mankind was capable of. The steeple rose last. Just like before, it tilted slightly to the left. We left it that way. It felt honest. The cross went up the day before the first service. The sky was overcast, but the wind broke just long enough for a single beam of sunlight to fall on the altar as the final bolt locked into place. We didn't cheer. We just stood there, heads bowed, hands over hearts. I held my grandfather's Bible, still singed, still broken, but whole enough to live again. We placed it beneath the altar, sealed in glass. A monument. A promise. A warning. The first Sunday service drew more people than I'd ever seen in Meadow Rise. Families, elders, young couples, veterans, former board members. Some brought folding chairs. Others stood in the back, arms crossed, faces wet. Pastor Greer led the sermon, but he didn't speak from the pulpit. He stood among the people, microphone clipped to his collar, voice low but unshakable. They tried to erase this place, not just the wood, not just the cross, but what it meant. And in doing so, they made us remember. And that memory became fuel. That fuel became fire. That fire became this. He gestured behind him. Resurrection. Karen didn't show. Her house sat dark. Her mailbox overflowed. Rumor had it she'd left town. Sold her home through a third-party broker. Filed for a new HOA presidency in a different state. The residents who once feared her now joked about her. Her old allies resigned one by one. The new board formed organically from people who believed in accountability, service, and truth. The HOA charter was revised, stripped of its worst clauses, rewritten with community oversight. They named a new policy after our church, the Bethany Clause. It forbids the demolition of any structure without a public vote, historic review, and supermajority consensus. It passed unanimously. I visited the church alone 1 week after the first service. Just me, a cup of coffee, and the sunrise creeping through the stained glass. I sat in the back pew, hand resting on the old Bible beneath the altar. I thought of my grandfather, of his boots in the aisle, his voice behind the pulpit, his quiet strength that never needed a gavel or a threat. I thought of the morning I found the rubble, the silence, the pain. And I thought of what rose from it, brick by brick, person by person, truth by truth. For the first time in what felt like years, I exhaled. And this time, I didn't taste dust. I tasted peace.